Sol I is a high school student. Despite her small and short legs, she harbors a crush on her tall, lanky neighbor, Cha Hyun, who stands at 6 feet tall. Every day, she begs Cha Hyun to let her walk to school with him, even though he constantly refuses, saying, "I don't like it." However, Sol I's persistence doesn't seem to anger him. When they both moved up to the next grade level, and she discovered they were in the same class, she mustered her courage to talk to him again. She confessed, "I like you," but Cha Hyun rejected her. Undeterred, Sol I responded, "I'll find a way to pursue you." Because of this, every time she saw him, Sol I tried to get his attention. Once, while cleaning the stairs and seeing him, she called out his name and waved, but accidentally dropped her plastic bucket, which nearly hit Cha Hyun on the head. Luckily, he dodged it. In class, while goofing off, Sol I copied someone else's homework. Seeing Cha Hyun enter, she loudly exclaimed, "This homework is easy, right?" trying to appear smart, but she only scored 35 out of 100 on the assignment. She was called to the teacher's office and Cha Hyun witnessed the whole thing. Naturally, many girls, drawn to Cha Hyun's good looks and academic achievements, tried to get close to him. However, Sol I, lacking in both looks and academic prowess, could only feel frustrated. One day, Sol I prepared a breakfast for Cha Hyun, waiting from sunrise, eventually falling asleep on a chair. Cha Hyun passed by, but instead of waking her, he simply rode his bike away. In literature class, listening to the teacher discuss a love letter written by the author, Sol I decided to write a letter to Hyun to express her feelings. But writing the letter proved to be difficult for her. Luckily, a classmate, claiming to have written many love letters before, offered to help. After an evening of learning how to write one, Sol I had a completed letter the next morning. While practicing her confession, another classmate unexpectedly arrived. It wasn't until this classmate, who turned out to be a new student, was called on to answer a question he couldn't answer that he finally entered the class. Later, Sol I was tasked with delivering Jin Hwan's love letter to a senior student. However, mischievous older students snatched the letter. Cha Hyun, hearing Sol I arguing with the seniors, rushed over. Just then, a supervisor arrived, and Cha Hyun pulled Sol I away. During evening self-study, while everyone diligently worked on their homework, Sol I was writing her love letter. Unfortunately, she was caught by the teacher, who read the letter aloud to the entire class. Cha Hyun couldn't stand it, arguing that the teacher was violating her rights. The infuriated teacher made him stand at the back of the class and continued reading. The class quickly devised a plan to turn the letter into a song and sang it together to rescue Sol I. The result was that the entire class had to write a self-criticism. Cha Hyun, usually the top student, couldn't even write his own. Sol I wanted to help, but he refused her assistance. Sol I was rather peculiar. Even though she was late for school, seeing Cha Hyun seemingly waiting for her at the gate, she beamed with a wide smile. On their way to school, the group of friends, feeling stressed from studies, decided to go to karaoke. But Cha Hyun, even in the karaoke room, continued reading his book. The other four, as if a switch had been flipped, sang and danced boisterously. Cha Hyun felt even more nervous and kept his gaze fixed on Sol I. The new student was a swimmer. That day, he skipped practice to go out. At the karaoke place, Sol I discovered her bicycle was missing. At that moment, the school supervisor was approaching. To avoid being caught, Jin Hwan abandoned his bicycle, leaving the lock on, and Sol I accepted the loss of her bike. The group fled in disarray. Going home, Sol I was scolded by her mother for losing her bike. Surprisingly, she felt happy, thinking she could get a ride to school with Cha Hyun. Unexpectedly, the next morning, Cha Hyun left without a word. She had to walk to school. Luckily, the swimmer classmate passed by and gave Sol I a ride. During the test results announcement, the teacher specifically praised Cha Hyun's essay, saying it was exceptionally well written. The teacher gave Cha Hyun's essay to Sol I, asking her to read it aloud to the class. Sol I was particularly excited and happy to read the essay of her crush. However, Cha Hyun didn't seem as pleased. His expression was grim. Sol I read enthusiastically. The essay recounted Cha Hyun's childhood memory of getting lost and the brief moment he spent with his father. Cha Hyun's father was very busy and didn't have much time for him. This melancholic mood lingered until they walked home together. Despite Sol I's attempts to lighten the atmosphere, Cha Hyun left her alone, returning to the bridge where his father had found him. He seemed to miss his father deeply. The group went to cheer on the swimmer classmate at his competition. Despite his best efforts, due to a shoulder injury sustained at the karaoke, he only won a silver medal. He was very upset during the interview. His friends consoled him, improving his mood. After the competition, 2 of the friends left early, leaving Sol I alone. She cheerfully congratulated her friend, returned the cheering banner, and he invited her to dinner. However, it was the anniversary of Cha Hyun's father's death, so she declined and rushed back to him. Upon arriving, Sol I was met with hurtful words from Cha Hyun, causing her to angrily return home. Cha Hyun's mother was overseas and was supposed to return for the anniversary, but couldn't due to her younger sibling's serious illness. Sol I's parents, being very caring, asked her to take some nutritious supplements to Cha Hyun after dinner. Sol I, having calmed down, entered Cha Hyun's house and found him asleep on the sofa. Lost in admiration, she noticed he had a high fever. With no other choice, Sol I stayed to care for him. She kept looking at Cha Hyun, and as their lips were about to touch, Cha Hyun suddenly woke up. The next morning, they met at the gate. Both were embarrassed by the previous night's events. Sol I diligently inquired about his health and gave him the medicine. Surprisingly, Cha Hyun offered Sol I a ride, something he'd never done before. In class, the class president election took place. Everyone meticulously prepared their presentations. One girl in the class showed a particular interest in Cha Hyun and intended to run for class president. Unwilling to be outdone in Cha Hyun's eyes, Sol I also registered. She practiced alone in the gymnasium. Feeling flustered and unsure of what to do, the swimmer classmate came to help. They laughed and joked together. This scene was unintentionally witnessed by Cha Hyun, and he didn't seem to like it. Election day finally arrived. Nervous on the stage, but thanks to the encouragement of her friends, Sol I delivered a confident presentation. However, the result wasn't what she hoped for. Sol I and another candidate tied. Cha Hyun was absent from class. Sol I thought he would vote for her, but when he returned, his vote was cast for someone else. This greatly disappointed Sol I. She ended up as the class vice president. On the stairs, Sol I saw the class president giving Cha Hyun a box of pastries, thanking him for editing her speech. Sol I couldn't accept this. She chased after Cha Hyun to ask why he didn't vote for her. But Cha Hyun's response was callous. He stated that she wasn't qualified to be class president. Angry, Sol I kicked Cha Hyun hard in the leg and ran off, regretting her actions immediately afterward. Sol I confided in her best friend, who was gleeful that Cha Hyun had received a painful kick. The class president assigned Sol I the task of managing class uniform funds, further complicating matters and making her unsure how to approach Cha Hyun. She mustered her courage to approach the desk, but before she could speak, he handed over the money and coldly demanded his change. However, when the class president approached, he spoke sweetly. Sol I felt irritated. After returning the change, she put the class fund envelope into her Korean literature textbook. Cha Hyun saw this but pretended not to notice. It wasn't until the class president mentioned the class fund that Sol I, checking her desk, discovered she'd taken both her Korean literature textbook and the envelope to the teacher's office. She panicked, not knowing what to do as the deadline to return the money was approaching. 2 friends volunteered to sneak into the teacher's office to retrieve the money, but they were unsuccessful. Sol I was so scared her face turned pale. The swimmer classmate, concerned, asked what was wrong. Sol I vaguely replied that she had a stomachache. The classmate, harboring feelings for Sol I, rushed to the infirmary to get her medicine. While bringing the medicine, he coincidentally met Sol I sitting distraught on the stairs. As he gave her the medicine, he encountered Cha Hyun. Cha Hyun asked, "Did you lose the class fund money?" She pleaded for Cha Hyun's help, but he still held a grudge over the kick and refused. Sol I returned to class, anxious. When the teacher inquired about the class fund, Sol I had no choice but to remain silent. Just then, Cha Hyun entered the classroom with a class fund envelope and gave it to Sol I. Despite receiving the money, she apologized to the class. Unexpectedly, the teacher praised her for bravely admitting her mistake. Cha Hyun's birthday was approaching, but Sol I was stressed. She wanted to buy him a watch, but her savings were insufficient. Her best friend empathized, as her father's birthday was also coming up, and she didn't have enough money for a gift. Desperate for money, the class president announced the school's sports festival. The first place prize was substantial, enough to buy gifts. The three girls signed up for the relay race. That day, they practiced enthusiastically, but their training wasn't going well. Sol I attempted the obstacle course but couldn't clear a single hurdle. Despite receiving guidance from her classmate, he didn't improve much. Worse yet, the friend responsible for the sack race fell during practice. After a doctor's visit, she was diagnosed as unable to participate due to needing a leg cast. With one member missing, the team couldn't compete. That evening, Sol I called Cha Hyun at home, wanting to meet under his house to talk. But he was busy studying and could only chat on the phone. Sol I told Cha Hyun about the day's training setbacks and the team's shortage of members. Cha Hyun just smiled without saying anything. The next day, Cha Hyun went to practice with everyone. Witnessing Sol I knock over every hurdle, he could only shake his head in dismay. Unable to bear watching any longer, Cha Hyun decided to help her practice. The sports festival finally arrived. Sol I and her teammates competed amidst enthusiastic cheers from the class. Although their teammate in the hula hoop event ate too many sausages, the swimmer classmate borrowed a brown bear costume and ran part of the race alongside Sol I. In the end, Sol I's team won, claiming the prize. However, contrary to rumors of 1.5 million won, the prize was only 150,000 won. Sol I had planned to use a larger amount to buy a gift, but this small sum was insufficient. Her best friend needed to see her father during class, as he was about to go abroad and wouldn't be back for several months. However, the school didn't allow leaving during class. She conspired with her friend to climb over the fence to get out. Finally, the group went to the wall, helping their friend climb over the fence. As soon as she climbed over, the supervisor appeared. With no other choice, they all fled. The friend, having successfully crossed the fence, encountered a teacher. The teacher gave her a jacket to cover herself and left without reprimanding her. The following week, the school held a performance festival. The teacher asked the students to prepare plays in groups. The selection would take place on Saturday. Sol I chose a romantic play, hoping Cha Hyun would play the male lead with her. Before she could ask, the class president approached and invited Cha Hyun to participate in Romeo and Juliet. Cha Hyun hesitated, saying he would consider the class president's offer. Sol I was furious. She persistently followed Cha Hyun, pleading with him to take the male lead in her chosen play, but to no avail. Cha Hyun consistently refused. On Saturday, the class president submitted the list of play groups. Cha Hyun wasn't in any group. The class president quickly stated that their group was one person short, and thus inevitably, Cha Hyun would perform with the class president's group, not Sol I's. Ha Young, grateful for the doctor's help during the fence climbing incident, harbored a secret crush on him. This time, she returned the jacket to the doctor, but Jin Ho, a classmate from a lower grade, saw and teased her. At that moment, Sol I and the swimmer classmate were practicing their play at his house. It seemed his life revolved around swimming. He hadn't experienced a proper school life. But since transferring schools and befriending Sol I, he'd started living a more interesting life. While taking Sol I home, he affectionately patted her head. Unfortunately, Cha Hyun, walking down the stairs of his house, witnessed this. During the play selection performance, all four acted with great immersion. The classmate then came forward and put his arm around Sol I. Cha Hyun, witnessing this, frowned in surprise. Jin Ho's humorous improvisation added a comedic element, but unfortunately, they were eliminated. The class president's group, with Cha Hyun in the male lead role, was selected. On the day of the competition, I was responsible for sound recording. Everything went smoothly until the sound of a kiss was recorded. Unable to contain her jealousy, she mumbled some lines into the recorder, accidentally recording her own words. Chaos erupted backstage. The classmate holding the poison cup spilled it all over Sol-I. The play was ruined, and everyone blamed her. After the performance, Cha-hyun quickly grabbed his jacket and looked for Sol-I. Cha-hyun angrily scolded her and left. After the incident, Sol-I went home, locked herself in her room for a day, and cried so much that tissues littered the floor. Her parents tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't come out. The next morning, on their way to school, Cha-hyun and Sol-I accidentally bumped into each other outside their houses. Sol-I, embarrassed, ran away. Cha-hyun ignored her and rode his bike to school. She was late and even more unlucky to encounter the strict school supervisor. She was reprimanded in front of her homeroom teacher. In class, her classmates laughed at Sol-I for her mistake. Sung, the swimmer classmate, quickly threatened the mean classmates, forcing them to apologize to Sol-I. Cha-hyun and a classmate were studying in the library when they saw Sol-I looking for a place to study. His classmate called her over to join them. Cha-hyun noticed a mistake in Sol-I's work and helped her correct it. However, due to his previous harsh words, Sol-I said she didn't need his explanation and could figure it out herself. Unable to continue sitting next to him, Sol-I stood up and went back to her classroom. That evening, on his way home from school, Cha-hyun saw Sol-I walking. He intentionally slowed down to wait for her, but when he looked back, she was gone. Upon arriving home, Hyun discovered his mother and younger brother had returned from abroad. That evening, after a joyful dinner, Cha-hyun went to his room to study. He kept writing and deleting texts, wanting to ask Sol-I how she was but not daring to. The homeroom teacher sent Sol-I's report card home to her parents. Sol-I's parents wanted to talk to her to find out what was wrong, but Sol-I told them she wanted to transfer schools. Perhaps out of shame, and to avoid facing Cha-hyun, she chose this option. The next morning, Sol-I walked to school. Sung, seeing this, rushed over on his bike to give her a ride. Sol-I casually asked, "What if I transfer schools?" Sung, immediately worried, frantically asked, "Does that school have a sports program?" Cha-hyun arrived at class and saw Sol-I drawing a picture. The drawing was a farewell message, which startled him. Sung called Sol-I, telling her to meet him at the school's swimming pool. There, Sung had prepared a pool with many toys, hoping to cheer her up. They played happily, and Sol-I's mood improved significantly. But unexpectedly, a teacher caught them. Sung was punished with 500 extra push-ups. Cha-hyun also heard about Sol-I's transfer from her mother. He was worried she would actually transfer. The next day, Sol-I was called to the principal's office. Her parents had also arrived to discuss the transfer. Hearing this, Cha-hyun rushed to the principal's office. The teacher was embarrassed, and Cha-hyun quickly made up an excuse about retrieving his notebook. He took the opportunity to pull Sol-I outside. In the hallway, Cha-hyun said to Sol-I, "Don't go." Surprisingly, he lacked conviction and simply smiled as if nothing had happened. In the end, Sol-I abandoned her decision to transfer. A new school year began, and luckily, all 5 friends remained in the same class. Sol-I arrived early and successfully prevented a classmate from taking Cha-hyun's seat. She happily sat next to Cha-hyun, just like the previous year, mainly to make it easier to admire her crush. Jin H-won saw a poster advertising a national singing competition and was determined to participate. His friends shook their heads in disapproval, not supporting his decision. Only Sol-I encouraged Jin H-won's singing dreams. After school, Sol-I planned to happily ask her parents for permission, but she witnessed her parents arguing about money. The next day, Jin H-won brought his friends to cheer him on at the qualifying round. On the way home from school, Sol-I found her house empty. She read a message from her mother saying she was going to another city. Sol-I panicked, not knowing what to do. Cha-hyun was walking down the street and met Sol-I. She burst into tears, saying her father had been gone for 2 days, and her mother wasn't home. This situation made Cha Hyun awkward. He could only stand still as she wiped her tears on his arm. The second round of the singing competition was held, and D-Sung and Sol I participated as backup singers. Cha Hyun and Ha Young cheered them on enthusiastically. But after the second line, they were forced off stage due to their terrible singing. To avoid wasting the trip, the group decided to spend a day in the city for a picnic. Cha Hyun's parents had reconciled, so Sol I went out with a cheerful mood. They all lay under the sky together. Suddenly, Sol I saw a shooting star and reminded everyone to make a wish. Cha Hyun flatly said, "It doesn't work." The group looked like they wanted to punch him. The two talked about Sol I's wish. She wished that Cha Hyun liked her too. The group played a truth game. Each person wrote a truth about themselves on a piece of paper and mixed them all up. Sol I picked a slip that said someone liked her, but two boys could have written it. Cha Hyun, whom she liked, and D-Sung, who liked her. Sol I couldn't know who wrote the truth. The following Saturday was Sol I's birthday. She tried to make plans with Cha Hyun for that day, as Cha Hyun's favorite soccer team would be playing a match. Sol I wanted to go with Cha Hyun, but the tickets were expensive, and getting them was difficult. Sol I went home to ask her mother for money, but the amount was too large, and she naturally got scolded. The group went to cheer on D-Sung at the National Swimming Championships. This time, he won first place. During the interview for winning the gold medal, D-Sung publicly stated that his biggest motivation was thanks to someone. All the reporters and classmates focused their attention on Sol I. This led to misunderstandings that they were dating. Even back in class, they were teased by their friends. Cha Hyun, arriving at school, unwillingly listened to the jokes. However, Sol I remained calm, acting as if nothing was happening. She told Cha Hyun that she couldn't go home that day and made plans to have fun with him on Saturday. Sol I even found a jersey from Cha Hyun's favorite team, signed by a famous player, to give him as a gift. But Cha Hyun coldly asked the price of the jersey and returned the money to Sol I. He callously said he wouldn't go out with her on Saturday. Ha Young later found Cha Hyun and told him that Saturday was Sol I's birthday. Ha Young also explained that Sol I had gone to great lengths to earn money to buy tickets for the soccer match Cha Hyun loved. D-Sung's swim coach came to school looking for him but didn't find him. He only encountered Sol I. He asked if she had seen D-Sung, as he'd skipped practice for several days. Sol I didn't know but repeatedly told him not to scold D-Sung. This made the coach start to notice things he hadn't seen before. The coach later went to where D-Sung worked part-time, quietly ordered something, and observed him working. When leaving, he didn't forget to tell him to go home that night. It turned out that the coach was D-Sung's father. That night, Sol I's father unexpectedly bought 2 tickets for the soccer match Cha Hyun loved. Sol I excitedly invited Cha Hyun to go, ignoring D-Sung's request for a date on Saturday. However, when they arrived at the ticket gate, they discovered that Sol I's father had bought fake tickets and couldn't enter the stadium. They had to sit outside and talk. At that moment, Sol I curiously asked about the paper Cha Hyun had written for the truth game. He gave her the paper, which contained a bland statement, "I hate this game." She remembered the paper she had drawn and wondered who had written the note saying they liked her. Ha Young, after hearing Sol I's story, advised her to try dating D-Sung. After all, he was good in every way, good personality, excellent athlete. But for Sol I, this was difficult because her feelings for Cha Hyun were still too strong. Sol I arranged to meet D-Sung to talk. But D-Sung, knowing Sol I's feelings for Cha Hyun, hid his true emotions. He said his previous words were just jokes, and instead of losing their friendship, he chose to keep it. Because of her meeting with D-Sung, Sol I returned home later than usual. At that moment, she met Cha Hyun taking out the trash. Sol I said she had just come from seeing D-Sung. Seeing this, Cha Hyun simply said, "Don't come home too late," and left. This small act was enough to make Sol I smile brightly. Later, both Sol I and Cha Hyun joined a debate group. Sol I was constantly belittled by her groupmates, which Cha Hyun noticed. On the weekend, they went out for a walk together. It was rare for the atmosphere between them to be so pleasant. Ha Young, harboring a crush on the school nurse, secretly followed him to the movie theater and bought tickets, mimicking his actions. She even lied to the ticket seller, claiming he was a mentally challenged Englishman, to successfully purchase the tickets. On their way back, they encountered Ha Young's best friend, Jean, being robbed. Ha Young intervened, and they both escaped the thugs. During the debate practice, I couldn't contribute any ideas. This angered her groupmates, who scolded her. I was also very upset. Seeing this, Cha Hyun approached, but only offered suggestions for her debate points. Afterward, I used those suggestions to present her group's unique argument, citing an example of two close friends, surprising and impressing everyone. At the end of the session, the group gathered at the stadium to discuss their secrets, getting drunk, dreaming of being robbed, or contracting a foot infection from their father. I's music player broke, and when she couldn't borrow Jin H1's, she became despondent. Cha Hyun offered to lend her his, but at that moment, the class president approached and gave him a box of pastries. I, sitting beside them, angrily turned to Jin H1 again. Just then, D-sung arrived and gave her his music player. Cha Hyun quietly put his music player back into his backpack. The teacher was teaching English, but I was engrossed in reading a book. Even when the teacher stood before her, she remained oblivious, only looking up when her friends called her out. The teacher immediately confiscated the book and D-sung's music player. Despite her pleas, she couldn't get it back. During break time, D-sung brought everyone many hand warmers, as it was winter, carefully keeping one aside for I and handing it to her personally. However, Cha Hyun, seeing this, left in displeasure. I quickly chased after him. In the end, D-sung, with his unrequited feelings, was the most hurt in the class. A classmate fell ill, and another classmate mentioned the flu season and how dangerous it was, noting deaths in other countries. The class was worried when I suddenly sneezed, realizing she might have the flu, and went to the infirmary for a checkup. Due to the flu outbreak, the class was allowed to go home. Everyone went to visit I, except Cha Hyun. When I asked, everyone lied and said Cha Hyun was busy with a teacher's request. Cha Hyun went to the teacher's office to retrieve I's confiscated book. He also took her music player along the way. But on his way, he encountered the school supervisor. Cha Hyun turned back, saw the supervisor at the infirmary, returned the music player, and asked him to give it to a friend without specifying who. The teacher went into the infirmary and asked, "Whose music player is this?" I recognized Cha Hyun's music player. Before she could speak, the class president, jealous of I, said it was hers, even though she hadn't borrowed it. Cha Hyun, carrying the book, went to the broadcasting room, clearly intending to read it to I. This shy boy, secretly in love, didn't dare to face her directly. I, in the infirmary, heard Cha Hyun reading because she was reading the same book and recognized the content. Everyone was surprised that only their close friends knew that it was Cha Hyun's voice on the school's broadcast. People thought that if he read like that, I would recover from any illness. In reality, I wished she were even sicker. Only the class president was furious. At the end of the day, both were well enough to go home. That evening, I called Cha Hyun, complimenting his reading voice and coyly asking him to read a new book to her. Surprisingly, unlike before, he didn't refuse. Cha Hyun said he would think about it, making I ecstatic. Christmas was approaching, and the girls in class were eagerly preparing gifts for their crushes. Ha Young prepared a letter for the school nurse, while I prepared a small card for Cha Hyun. I's rival, the class president, prepared a scarf for Cha Hyun. I felt her gift was too simple. The group of friends walked home from school together. I complained about her cold hands, and D-sung, noticing this, gave her his gloves. The jealous Cha Hyun pulled I aside, claiming it was dangerous on the road. The danger was just an elderly woman walking a dog. I went home and saw her father's incredible knitting skills. While I and her friend watched him knit, they dropped the prepared card. Her parents, seeing this, assumed their daughter had a crush. They were eager to know who the boy was that made their daughter learn to knit. Sol I's mother tried to get information from Cha Hyun, but he replied, "No one." At school, Sol I saw the class president almost finished knitting the scarf for Cha Hyun. Ha Young commented that it looked like a doormat, making the class president dejected. Ha Young also brought her gift to the school nurse, but found his desk piled high with expensive presents. She put her small gift back in her bag and went to class. On her way to class, Ha Young was stopped by a group of boys who confessed their feelings, but they were all slackers who didn't focus on their studies. Ha Young firmly refused. "My king isn't that pathetic." Just then, Jin Hwan passed by and successfully escorted Ha Young to class. Sol I entered the classroom and saw the class president giving Cha Hyun a gift, which he readily accepted. Angry, Sol I said she wouldn't give Cha Hyun a gift. That evening, she discovered her card was missing. Sol I asked her parents about the card, and they wondered who it was for. Sol I vaguely said she was testing the pen and hadn't sent it to anyone. Sol I felt down all evening, even wanting to throw away the card, but she hesitated and then stopped. The next morning at school, Sol I saw Cha Hyun wearing the scarf the class president had given him. Angry, she said nothing and walked away. That evening, the class had to clean before the winter break. Ha Young was on a desk cleaning the window. Jin Hwan, claiming it was dangerous, made her get down. He then pushed Sol I up to clean. Cha Hyun, uneasy, gently approached, took Sol I's hand, pulled her down from the desk, attached the cleaning rag to the mop, and gave it to her. Cha Hyun's actions stunned everyone. Sung, wanting to make Sol I happy, even though it wasn't snowing on Christmas Eve, climbed onto the rooftop and used 2 cans of artificial snow spray to spray through the classroom window. Although it wasn't real snow, everyone was very happy. Later, real snow fell from the sky, making Christmas Eve complete. Afterward, Ha Young and Jin Hwan walked home together in the real snow. Coincidentally, Jin Hwan's name and the school doctor's name both start with the same 2 letters. Unable to give a gift to the doctor, she gave her gift to Jin Hwan. Sol I and Cha Hyun also walked home together. On the way, Sol I sneezed continuously, and Cha Hyun put his scarf around her. It turned out that this scarf was a gift from Cha Hyun's mother, not the other scarf. Hearing this, Sol I's mood unexpectedly changed from sadness to cheerfulness and vivacity. She gave Cha Hyun a Christmas tree-shaped card. Upon arriving home, she saw that her father had prepared Christmas decorations. She gave her father the pink card, addressed to her beloved, revealing her father to be the recipient, which surprised but also greatly pleased Sol I's father. After the winter break, everyone returned to school. With news from Jin Hwan, the class would have a volunteer trip after the mock exam, exciting everyone. On their way home from school, everyone had their own plans. Sol I even imagined confessing her feelings to Cha Hyun on the field trip, and counted her money to prepare for her confession. She and Sung went to a store to choose necessary items. Cha Hyun intentionally made an excuse to take out the trash to wait for Sol I to return from school in front of their house. This secret was discovered by Sol I because each time he took out the trash, there was only a small amount of garbage. Ha Young originally wanted to buy tickets to sit next to the school doctor because she liked him, but Jin Hwan insisted on sitting next to her to watch a movie, leaving her helpless. The volunteer event arrived, and the whole class went together. While working, Sol I constantly followed Cha Hyun like a shadow. Even during the class field trip, Sung had to immerse himself in the swimming pool because of the national team selection. Seeing Cha Hyun resting on the lawn, Sol I ran to his side and kept watching him rest. Cha Hyun unexpectedly turned his head, and the two faced each other, leaving both flustered and unsure of what to do. During the evening of the field trip, Cha Hyun sat between the class president and Sol I. The class president took this opportunity to ask Cha Hyun to open a bottle of water for Sol I. Instead, she intentionally fumbled with the water bottle. Unexpectedly, he silently opened the bottle and gave it to her. The class president sitting beside her could only fume. Feeling that she could act, Sol I whispered to Cha Hyun, asking him to meet her at a nearby vacant lot. With the help of two friends, they prepared the location. However, when the lights came on, it was the class president chasing after Cha Hyun. He intentionally hugged her, allowing Sol-I to see. Sol-I could only stand frozen in place, tears streaming down her face. At this moment, Di-sung appeared, turning her around and wiping away her tears, preventing her from witnessing the scene. Cha Hyun also saw the grand confession preparation, but Sol-I was hugging someone else, a truly ironic situation. Di-sung gave Y, presumably a person's name or a shortened nickname, a ride home. Upon arriving home, Sol-I encountered Cha Hyun returning alone. Instinctively, Sol-I ran back inside, leaving the two boys facing each other. There, Di-sung confirmed his feelings for Sol-I and warned Cha Hyun not to hurt her again. Cha Hyun, knowing he had hurt Sol-I, tried to buy food to apologize but hesitated for a long time, unsure what to buy. Finally, with Jin Hwan's help, he bought a lot of food to bring to class, but Sol-I was asleep, so he only left it beside her desk. Sol-I woke up and accidentally dropped the food. Di-sung, passing by, picked it up to help, but Sol-I refused, saying it wasn't hers. In the end, the food ended up being disposed of. Jin Hwan, the mischievous one, and two classmates opened a fortune-telling book. At the same time, Ha-young and Sol-I went down to the cafeteria to look at their horoscopes, looking at their own and those of their crushes. Ha-young checked hers and the school doctor's. Unexpectedly, the zodiac signs of the doctor and Jin Hwan were the same. That mischievous person was hiding behind a shelf eavesdropping, and when he heard, he was overjoyed. The next day, Di-sung had a day off from practice, so the two of them made a date. While they were walking, the class president unexpectedly bumped into Sol-I, and Sol-I angrily scolded her. Cha Hyun, arriving later, only told the class president to go back to class. Sol-I angrily left with a curt, "I'm leaving," and ran away. That night, the class president stealthily entered the principal's office, intending to steal the exam, but was caught in the act and cried loudly in the room, a classic case of thief crying stop thief. Cha Hyun's younger brother received a love letter and ran to talk to him, earnestly advising that boys should apologize to girls first because boys are always wrong. So, the next morning, Cha Hyun planned to play the piano with two friends and called Y to apologize to Sol-I. Seeing this, Sol-I softened. Cha Hyun and Sol-I went home, one after the other. Cha Hyun was about to speak to Sol-I when Di-sung arrived by motorcycle to take Sol-I for a ride. Although he had been selected for the national team, Di-sung unfortunately suffered a shoulder injury and couldn't compete in the upcoming match. When they returned home, it was raining. Cha Hyun was waiting for Y under the house with an umbrella. But when Sol-I ran home, the first thing she did was answer Di-sung's call confirming her safe arrival home. Cha Hyun could only stand silently with the umbrella in his hand. Ha-young went to find the doctor, but when caught, she made a flimsy excuse. The real reason was to see the doctor one more time. Di-sung was very good at caring for others. He knew that when people are sad, sweets help improve their mood, so he gave Y a lot of snacks. Jin Hwan couldn't stand the two people's Cold War, and this time decided to decisively intervene. Y went to the library to read her favorite book and called Cha Hyun to join her. Seeing him arrive, Sol-I stood up to move to another table. But Cha Hyun was faster, keeping her there. They sat together, reading. He couldn't help but stare at the girl, even using his pen to tuck her hair behind her ear. He was so happy that he was still daydreaming on the way home. Seeing a group of girls talking about finding four-leaf clovers to give to their crushes, the two of them also searched for them. Ha-young made a four-leaf clover picture and took it to the school doctor's office. Entering the room, she saw scattered medicine on the floor, but didn't think much of it and quietly returned to class, unaware of what was behind. Gi-hong, presumably a name, saw her leave and curiously went inside to see the four-leaf clover picture. Finally, he learned that the person Ha-young liked for so long wasn't him. It was all just a coincidence. This made him very heartbroken. He learned that everyone knew about Ha-young liking the doctor but didn't tell him. This made Gi-hong not go to school. The class president fainted, causing chaos in the class. Her mother came to school to make a fuss, claiming the school was irresponsible for her daughter's fainting. The school doctor was very upset about this and stated that it was the mother's lack of care that caused the daughter's depression. The doctor ultimately apologized and resigned. Ha-young sadly went to ask, but the doctor just smiled and said it was okay, making her want to cry but unable to. After a period of absence, Jin H1 returned to school with a new look, brightly dyed hair. He boldly stood on the podium to confess to his crush and received enthusiastic support from the class. Jin H1 had to be hospitalized because he had a congenital heart disease. 3 friends visited and witnessed him screaming in frustration because he had to draw a large blood sample. Seeing his 3 friends, Jin H1 kept looking towards the door, anticipating Ha-young's arrival. When she did arrive, she intentionally brought the homework she had copied for him, but he pretended to be aloof and didn't use it. She intentionally chatted with his other friends to ignore Ha-young. On the way home, Cha-hyun and Sol-I met Cha-hyun's mother and accidentally overheard that Cha-hyun would attend a prestigious school. This made Sol-I feel inferior. She consulted her homeroom teacher, who, assessing Sol-I's abilities, said she could only attend a local college. D-sung's national team selection was approaching, but his shoulder pain was unbearable. After confessing to Ha-young, Jin H1 persistently avoided her, even though she came to his room to do homework. Today was the doctor's last day at school. Ha-young waited for the doctor to say goodbye, and she was so sad she cried. The 2 girls, both experiencing unrequited love, sadly confided in each other. Both their crushes were going far away to study or work. 2 guys who liked the same girl decided to settle it with a beer drinking contest. A bookworm like Cha-hyun, despite a good start, couldn't beat a pro like D-sung. Even though Sol-I lost the bet, she sided with the winner, D-sung, and even enthusiastically wanted Cha-hyun to teach her how to drink beer. Cha-hyun couldn't bear his crush being friendly with another guy, so he ended up forcefully pulling her away. On their way home, Sol-I kept praising Cha-hyun to cheer him up, but inadvertently mentioned D-sung, causing Cha-hyun to cover her mouth and lead her home. The class was cleaning, and when the class president wanted to wipe Y's face, Cha-hyun lied that the teacher called her to the teacher's office. He actually wanted to separate them, but D-sung saw through this. Cha-hyun was truly a petty devil. At the teacher's office, Sol-I overheard the teacher talking to D-sung's father about a serious shoulder problem. Wanting to cheer D-sung up about his inability to compete, she took him out for snacks. The 2 of them also resolved to study hard to pass the university entrance exam. When they arrived home, Cha-hyun was already waiting downstairs. He used the excuse of buying food and letting his younger brother wait for a short talk between him and Sol-I, revealing a blossoming relationship. There were 100 days left until the university entrance exam. All the students in the class were diligently studying for the best results. The teacher distributed the application forms for university applications to the class. But Y still didn't know her strengths and dreams. She wasn't good at many subjects. Only drawing was her strength. Ha-young brought the application questionnaire to the hospital for Jin H1, surprising him. He didn't expect Ha-young to know he was still in the hospital. Gi-hong could only stubbornly lie that he had been readmitted. Cha-hyun confided in his mother that he didn't want to be a professor, refusing to follow her wishes. He wanted to study medicine. Cha-hyun went to the Hong Heart Hospital. They talked about their feelings for their respective crushes. Jin H1 felt inferior because of his heart condition, which could cause him to faint at any time. Cha-hyun could have studied to become a professor, but chose to study medicine domestically. Ultimately, he admitted it was to be with Sol-I. Cha-hyun taught Sol-I a simple math problem in the library, but it was difficult for Sol-I to understand. While waiting for Sol-I to solve the problem, Cha-hyun closed his eyes for a moment. When she finished and looked over, she saw Cha-hyun sleeping and was moved. She stared at him for a long time. D-sung passed by, saw this, and quietly avoided them as if he hadn't seen anything. Cha-hyun unexpectedly woke up when the distance between them was almost 0. He gave a condition. When Sol-I could solve problems without biting her pen, he would believe her words were true. When they returned to class, they met D-sung. While greeting each other, a call came from the nursing home saying that Mrs. D-sung had disappeared. Chahyun and the others left the school gate to find her, searching around the nursing home. Finally, they found her sitting on a bench in the garden. It turned out that she had gone out because she was longing for D-Sung. She sat there waiting for him. However, when he stood before her, she didn't recognize him. The head nurse recounted the story of her grandson to the three of them. She believed D-Sung could become a world champion. That evening, Chahyun and D-Sung sat together and talked. Chahyun decided he wouldn't go abroad. D-Sung decided to start over and make his grandmother's dream a reality. He resolved to let go of Sol-I, wishing Chahyun would always be by her side, making her happy. After practice, D-Sung looked at the cheering banner Sol-I had brought for him and decided to meet her to express his feelings. However, he didn't want Sol-I to accept his feelings. He just wanted to feel better by expressing himself. He decided he wouldn't like her anymore. In the end, the one who suffered the most was the one with unrequited love. The university entrance exam arrived, and the friends tried their best. Ji-Hong was in the hospital and had a separate proctor for the exam. The graduation exam ended successfully. Ha-Young went to the hospital to ask Jin H-Won about his exams. He expressed confidence despite his illness, receiving Ha-Young's acceptance rather than rejection as he'd expected. On the day they received their university entrance exam results, Sol-I's score was much higher than expected. Chahyun and Sol-I sat drinking water together. She begged Chahyun to write in her yearbook, but he refused, saying yearbooks are for those who are separating, not for people who will remain together. Chahyun was accepted into the medical school he wanted. His friends also received acceptance letters. Only Sol-I was unreachable. She didn't pass her desired school. Chahyun couldn't reach her and was worried. Sol-I sadly confided in Chahyun about failing the university entrance exam. Chahyun encouraged her to retake the exam at his school. Sol-I was scared to study, but Chahyun promised to help her study from the beginning. On the day of the World Championship Finals, D-Sung called Sol-I, wanting her to cheer him on. She also told him she was retaking the exam. The two encouraged each other, each with their own goals. D-Sung won the World Championship. During the interview, he sent a message of encouragement to Sol-I for her retake exam. This time, Sol-I seriously studied, immersing herself in drawing every day. Unexpectedly, the group of friends visited Sol-I before her art practical exam, boosting her confidence. After a year, Sol-I passed the art department at the prestigious university where Chahyun was studying. The group celebrated their entrance to university, fulfilling their dreams. At the end of the party, everyone was drunk except a few guys. Sol-I was so drunk she mistook D-Sung for Chahyun. On the way home, drunk, Sol-I confessed her feelings to Chahyun again. Along the road they had walked together during their 5 months of high school. Chahyun and Sol-I shared their first kiss at the celebration with Chahyun's university classmates. Sol-I was there and was repeatedly offered drinks by her tablemates. Chahyun, seeing it was getting out of hand, stopped them. They enthusiastically proposed a game, Truth or Dare. It was then that Sol-I unexpectedly questioned Chahyun, wondering if she had misheard him earlier. She didn't know when it happened, but she had become Chahyun's girlfriend. After Chahyun confirmed it, Sol-I happily jumped and danced in the street. Sol-I shared her dating news with Ha-Young. Someone newly in love, like Sol-I, was flustered and moved just by holding hands. Someone who had been dating for a year, like Ha-Young, could only laugh at Sol-I. Sol-I was wearing a dress Ha-Young had chosen. Chahyun asked Sol-I to stay with him that night instead of returning to the dormitory. They would simply study together at the library. The newly dating couple, after dinner, sat together in the park. Although they were dating, they were still shy with each other. A simple kiss on the cheek had them smiling at each other for the whole evening. Ha-Young, with her attractive face, was a captivating university student. Just sitting and studying in a cafe attracted people asking for her phone number. D-Sung, after winning the world championship, became famous, constantly receiving interviews and fan adoration. Sol-I and D-Sung were studying in the library. D-Sung handed her a book to read. It was a cold winter day, freezing cold. Sol-I was wearing gloves and high boots, so she couldn't turn the pages of the book. Sung noticed her struggling and turned the page for her. That was the power of a newly budding love. One person reading, one person turning the pages. This moment was captured by a reporter and immediately became famous in university magazines. Actually, Sol I knew about this beforehand. The reporter contacted Sol I after taking the pictures and gave the couple tickets, making other couples even more envious. Gi Hong, presumably a name, received a notification from the hospital for treatment. Cha Hyun worriedly rushed there, but Jin Hwan insisted on keeping his illness a secret from his girlfriend. The next day, he even planned to break up with her because Jin Hwan's surgery was serious. During the surgery, his girlfriend was in Jin Hwan's hospital room, encouraging him to get through the dangerous surgery. Fortunately, the surgery was a complete success. Y was working part-time distributing flyers, a tiring job with few takers. Her boyfriend came to help. The girls gathered around, realizing the success was due to his handsome face. Cha Hyun was working at the hospital. Sol I saw nurses approaching her boyfriend in the hospital and pretended to act cute with him. Everyone in the lobby felt goosebumps. Because of his work at the hospital, Cha Hyun was very busy, and they had little time together. For example, just a few minutes after they met, Cha Hyun received a call he needed to take immediately within the hospital department. Two people had to separate again, though neither wanted to. Cha Hyun was always buried in his work at the hospital, while Sol I was a freelancer. The differences between them also caused an invisible distance. After days of waiting, Sol I received the confirmation letter for her first job. Joyful, she wanted to call her boyfriend, but Cha Hyun continuously didn't answer his phone. Sol I fell ill, and the only caregivers currently were Jin Hwan and Ha Young. Cha Hyun only opened his phone when he returned to the room, a long string of messages and unanswered calls from Sol I. At that moment, he could only send her a goodnight message. Sol I went to her interview, but the process wasn't smooth. Lacking experience and achievements, the interviewer seemed dissatisfied. A senior at the design firm called her to tutor at a center, but he made a pass at her. Although she fought him off, she felt uncomfortable. Later, while visiting the hospital, she accidentally overheard that Cha Hyun would be studying abroad in a month. The pressure of work, coupled with hearing this news from others and not her boyfriend, left Sol I feeling helpless. She broke up with Cha Hyun at their most stressful moment. An emergency alert reached Cha Hyun. He could do nothing but leave his girlfriend and rush to work. Even his work wasn't stable. They couldn't save a severely injured patient after a failed emergency surgery. Cha Hyun ran to the lobby to find Sol I, but she wasn't there. The entire lobby was empty. He went to Sol I's dorm, only to find out she had moved out. He learned she had left before he went abroad. Cha Hyun called Sol I, wanting her to see him off, but only received a cold reply telling him not to wait for her. In Cha Hyun's luggage for his studies abroad was always the bracelet Sol I had given him in high school, but he chose to leave it behind before departing. A year later, Cha Hyun returned to Daesung from America. He made plans to go out with Sol I, but upon arriving at the parking lot, he heard that his father was hospitalized. The two rushed to the hospital. While Daesung went with Cha Hyun to see his father, he unexpectedly met his ex-girlfriend there. Neither of them desired this reunion. While they were still awkward, Daesung appeared to defuse the situation. Cha Hyun found a doctor in the hospital to request surgery for his father, which also surprised Sol I. The friends visited Sol I's father, and she was surprised to see Cha Hyun's father there. She thought he would stay in America and not return. Late that night, Sol I was waiting for a taxi when Cha Hyun drove by and asked her to get in. He would take her home. He asked for her address, but Sol I resisted, telling him to drop her off at the subway station. During Sol I's father's surgery, her mother and she anxiously waited. Cha Hyun was equally tense, present at the operating room door. The doctor who worked with him was curious about Cha Hyun's ex-girlfriend, and upon meeting her, seemed to guess who she was. She pulled Sol I aside and intentionally asked about Cha Hyun's long-term girlfriend, revealing that during his time in America, he had spoken a lot about her and showed that he was still deeply in love. The surgery was successful. Sol I's mother prepared a lot of delicious food and asked Sol I to take it to thank Cha Hyun, specially preparing portions for both of them. After many years, the group of friends reunited for a drinking party at a restaurant. Originally, there were only 4 people, but the talkative Jin H1 said it wasn't enough and very naturally called Sol I's ex-boyfriend. This situation made everyone at the drinking party uncomfortable. When leaving, D-Sung's management company picked up Jin H1 and Ha Young. Cha Hyun drove Sol I home. In the car, she surprisingly saw the bracelet she had given him in high school. He still kept it, hanging in his car. After the drive, she got out of the car without saying anything. Cha Hyun followed her, grabbed her arm, and questioned her, wanting to know if she had ever regretted their breakup. Sol I responded without emotion that she didn't regret it. When he kissed her again, she was surprised but didn't resist. Pushing him away, after that incident, Sol I sat at the bus stop, summoning her courage to call Cha Hyun to clarify things. She rushed to say everything on her mind, not even noticing the many people at the bus stop listening to her. They thought she was arguing with her boyfriend. Sol I talked for a while but didn't hear Cha Hyun respond. When she questioned it, she heard the nurse friend on the other end of the phone. Sol I was truly unlucky. While their friends were still uncertain, Jin H1 and Ha Young were already preparing for their wedding. Sol I brought lunch for her father, but Cha Hyun bought lunch for them both, naturally leaving her lunch left over. Her mother insisted that she bring the lunch to Cha Hyun because he was working the night shift. Although her father tried to stop her, Sol I reluctantly had to face the person she least wanted to see. She was caught standing awkwardly at the entrance to Cha Hyun's on-duty room. He insisted on pulling her in, wanting them to have dinner together. Cha Hyun asked if she was still angry about the previous night. He wanted them to get back together, but for Sol I, their relationship had ended 3 years ago. Despite his pleas, she coldly left. Sol I's father was discharged from the hospital. D-Sung helped, and her parents warmly welcomed Cha Hyun. He also visited her father before leaving. This encounter made Sol I quickly change the subject. The wedding day of Jin H1 and Ha Young arrived. Everyone was present. The bridesmaid, Ha Young, gave D-Sung the wedding rings to hold, but he thought he lost them and frantically searched with the 2 friends. When he finally pulled the rings from his jacket, he grabbed a large diamond ring instead. Jin H1 said it wasn't his ring, startling D-Sung, who then pulled out their rings from his pocket. Jin H1 took the wedding rings, leaving only D-Sung and Cha Hyun, who didn't speak, but perhaps each understood why that ring appeared. At the wedding, their high school classmates were all present, even the class president, who didn't like either of them, returned from America and happily reminisced about old times. Unaware that the 2 had broken up long ago, the class president messaged that they would both be attending his wedding. The wedding ceremony took place before the couple's friends and family. During the flower toss, for some reason, the bouquet flew toward Cha Hyun. To avoid embarrassment, he gave the wedding bouquet to Sol I. Hesitating for a moment, she reluctantly accepted the bouquet. Everyone applauded, congratulating them, but D-Sung couldn't be happy. After the party, Cha Hyun couldn't contact Sol I. She avoided him. Sol I successfully signed a contract for a new job, while Cha Hyun struggled to meet her. He sought help from Jin H1, but because of what happened to her when they broke up, Jin H1 refused, saying he should find a way to get back together with Sol I. Sol I and her friends went to the housewarming party of the newly married couple. Everyone was there, but Cha Hyun looked different. He wore his high school uniform, surprising everyone. One by one, they went to a corner of the garden to pose for pictures. When it was Cha Hyun's turn, since he was wearing his high school uniform, Sol I, with the camera, asked him to strike cute poses, something he had never done before. The whole group laughed hysterically at the poses Cha Hyun made. While the party was in full swing, Cha Hyun received a call from the hospital and had to leave. Before leaving, he looked at Sol I, and D-Sung immediately said he would take Sol I home safely. After dropping Sol I off, D-Sung took out a bouquet of flowers and a diamond ring he had prepared, confessing his feelings to Sol I. However, Sol I didn't reciprocate. She only saw D-Sung as a good friend. Rejected, D-Sung dejectedly called Jin H1 to drink. He drank countless drinks, but still wanted more. Jin Hwan directly collapsed on the table, leaving only Di-sung and Cha-hyun awake. Di-sung questioned Cha-hyun about abandoning Sol-I for 3 years and why he returned now. Cha-hyun said he still loved Sol-I very much. Di-sung had never heard Cha-hyun talk so much. When he finished speaking, Di-sung surprisingly turned his phone around, displaying an incoming call with the number 1. It turned out that Sol-I had heard everything they had said. That was Cha-hyun's long-hidden, unspoken feelings. The 3 of them went home, leaving only Sol-I and Cha-hyun. Cha-hyun apologized again and wanted to get back together. This time, Sol-I didn't refuse, only saying she needed more time. Sol-I finally completed her first manga. After finishing, she found a missed call on her phone. Instead of answering directly, she went to Cha-hyun's office. After he finished working and returned, he found her asleep on his bed, immediately hugging his girlfriend and going to sleep. The doctor friend of Cha-hyun admired Di-sung. They had met once at the hospital. Perhaps that fateful meeting made their hearts flutter. Jin Hwan successfully pursued his passion, opening a dance class for middle-aged women. Cha-hyun, with the help of the children at the hospital, created a romantic scene, proposing to her at the hospital. The setting might not have been ideal, but for her, it was truly meaningful. After the proposal, they became even more inseparable. Cha-hyun was at home because he didn't have to go to the hospital the next day. While sleeping, he received a call from Sol-I's mother, urging her to go on a blind date with someone she knew. Cha-hyun couldn't stand it anymore, immediately taking his phone to interrupt and tell her mother that they were back together. Their first night at his girlfriend's house involved one sleeping on the sofa and one on the bed, causing both to be restless and unable to sleep. The next morning, as they were waking up, Sol-I's parents knocked on the door to visit, an unforeseen situation. Sol-I wanted Cha-hyun to hide, but he quickly opened the door. Her mother entered, followed by a scene of father-in-law and son-in-law toasting each other, to the point of not even knowing what they were saying. Sol-I was contacted to hold a signing event at a bookstore. She happily announced it to everyone, but they all joined in saying she was busy that day and couldn't make it. After signing everything, they all went there. Cha-hyun reminisced about their high school years together, from when he first met Sol-I to when he learned of her feelings for him. He recounted all his feelings for Sol-I, detailing how he fell for her, summarizing it all in a self-recorded video. Finally, the story had a happy ending after many hardships.